Hello everyone, my name is Fozia and I am an assistant professor at the Khan University's Institute for Educational Development, and I'm here to record a Green Hour special show with Azeem Paracha. Azeem was born in Karachi and is a geography/environmental science specialist, is an environmental advocate, works at a company called ExpectAI. We'll learn more about this in a short time. It's essentially a cutting-edge climate business, climate tech sort of company. And other than that, he's very passionate about environment and tries to make businesses impactful, profitable, with a sustainable future. I'm very happy, Azeem, that you have joined us.
Thank you so much.
Would you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your philosophy as an environmental advocate?
Absolutely. Hello, assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Azeem. I'm currently 22. So born and raised in Karachi, and I've always been fascinated by the natural world. I owe it to watching way too much National Geographic growing up. But that's really got me interested in the world, in life, in climate change. And that's what got me to study geography at both O-levels and A-levels here in Karachi. I think my school was one of the few ones which actually offered that as a subject, so I was very lucky to get into it very early on. And then I went on to do my undergraduate in London, at King's College London, in geography and environmental science, focusing more on BSc geography, as we call it, which is physical geography. Geography is broken up into two sort of main sectors, physical and human geography. They all obviously overlap quite a bit, but yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
And you talked about your passion for the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I usually see that lacking in the young people who grow up in the cities. So, of course, you had more academic opportunities, but how are you so invested in this cause? Because I think that's an anomaly of sort with the young people that I see in the city.
You know, I must say, so just as an example, out of 350 other kids that I had at my school, only 7 of us did geography. Yeah. So a tiny percent. So it clearly wasn't a very popular subject. And I don't think that's owed to the prospects, but it was more on people just didn't know. So I think the question that I got asked most is, why geography? What does that even mean? What do you even study? What do you do? And that was my favorite question to answer, actually, because the way I see geography, it's an amalgamation of a broad, like every single subject. So geography itself, the way I see it, is a mix of every subject that you can think of, everything from economics to sociology to politics. And then when you get into physical geography, you have, chemistry, physics, biology, all those things sort of come together and make geography what it is, because it is the study of the natural and the human world and how it overlaps, all the interactions. So yeah, I was just so fascinated because there's so much to it. There's so much to learn. There's so much that we don't actually know about our world and about our Earth, especially when we talk about climate change and its impacts. That's sort of why I was drawn to it, because even though it's one of the most basic subjects out there, everyone knows what geography actually is. Not a lot of people actually have that deeper understanding about what it truly is.
Wonderful. And in terms of getting into your specialization of environmental science and geography, this intersection, and how did it lead you to AI? Would you want to talk about it as well?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So again, I think one of the greatest issues that humanity faces, as we know, is climate change. What climate change is actually the most natural phenomena. It's been going on for millions and millions of years, and it will continue to go on. But anthropogenic climate change, which is human-induced climate change, is really the issue that we have at hand. And that's mainly owing to humans and the emissions that we have. So fossil fuel emissions, etc., etc. Everything has an emission. And now it's leading to this thing called the enhanced greenhouse gas effect, which basically means all the emissions that we're putting up in the world are sort of acting as a blanket. And climate change is usually synonymous with global warming, which is one of the biggest issues. And then it has a plethora of other issues, as we know. Sea level rising, it getting hotter, more extreme weather events, etc., etc. So I was very fascinated on how we can actually work towards a solution, because the thing with climate change is there's never going to be just one winner, but everyone can be a loser. And if we don't collectively work, not just businesses, but countries, economies together, politicians together, we're never going to reach that end goal. And that's something that's essential for us to sustain life.
Fantastic. So collective action is what we need, and more concrete
Absolutely.
collective action. So I want to know more about this, but I'll ask you more questions in a little bit.
Fantastic.
All right, Ji, we're sitting with Azeem, who is very, very young and passionate about environment and does a lot of advocacy and sustainability related work. Azeem, it has been nice to know you so far. My next question, because perhaps people also need to be educated about all of this, would be a little bit about the basics of terminologies, I would say, because I feel that many people are not that educated when it comes to climate science and in general everything that is trending with it. So tell us about ExpectAI, your role in ExpectAI, and as you tell us about this, please also explain some of the key terms that may emerge in your explanation of the company.
Absolutely. So ExpectAI is essentially a climate action platform. We focus on enabling companies to decarbonize profitably. What that essentially means is what can companies do that's good for their business, and then on the back end good for the environment. So I've been at ExpectAI for about 1.5 years now. I'm a climate action specialist, and it was actually founded by Dr. Anand Verma, who's a big advocate. He's very passionate about climate change, climate impact, and how you can actually make it a business. How can you bring business into it, and how can you use it as a business opportunity as opposed to just something that you have to do because of disclosure, just because you have to. So climate change and sustainability, which is probably the two biggest buzzwords in this day and age, usually it's seen as a cost. So every time a company thinks about sustainability, they see it as, oh, it's a cost that we have to do, it's a reporting exercise, it's a disclosure exercise, etc., etc. But what we do at ExpectAI is we use public data and AI to enable any company to take profitable climate action. Again, if I talk about what profitable climate action is, it's what can you do, and it doesn't necessarily need to be just the big ticket items. What are the small steps that you can take to actually be more sustainable and reduce your emissions? So what decarbonization actually is how can you reduce your emissions? And the way to think about it is everything has a certain emission value. So does it have a cost value? What I mean by that is, in this room, for example, the lights that are switched on, they have a certain emission based on the energy that's coming from a grid, but they also have a cost to it. And so one way to think about emissions and actually decarbonizing is how can you reduce your costs, and how can you be more sustainable as a company based on your consumption and not just, emit, etc.
Right, and some key terms such as decarbonization, net zero, what do these mean for people who are listening to you but do not really know?
Yeah, fantastic. So I think the biggest one is probably net zero that we hear. And that basically means is everything that we emit, we need to either offset or get that to zero. So as I mentioned before, everything has an emission. And this can be everything from, a tiny light bulb all the way to a massive economy. Everything has its own emission. And net zero, which is more of an infamous term nowadays, it's about how do we balance it out. So even if we're emitting something, how do we either offset, and how do we reach that true net zero or climate neutral? That usually those two words are interchangeable. But that basically means everything that we emit, how do we either sequester that, reduce that, or how do we reduce our emissions in the first place to get closer to zero? As we spoke about before, the biggest factor that drives climate change is emissions. Another term to think about is CO2e, CO2 equivalent. Yeah. So carbon dioxide, as we know, is one of the most prevalent gases, but it's not the most potent. What that means is a gas like methane, the same amount of methane and carbon dioxide, methane is actually 28 times more warming than it. So that's why we use CO2e as a sort of standard, because that's the main way that it's actually calculated, etc.
Wonderful. So let me also make it simple for people who perhaps do not want to get into the jargons but want to understand what it is and how this can be done. So imagine that, we're a small student business or a random business on the streets, and ExpectAI could help us improve our profitability while being sustainable. So how would you, ideally, how would you approach me? What do I need to know in terms of how can I become a profitable but sustainable business?
No, I love this question because at ExpectAI, what we focus on is the SMBs, the small to mid-sized businesses who usually have three things in common. They're time poor, what basically means they don't actually have the time to do everything regarding sustainability because they're usually small teams. They're resource poor, which basically means they don't have the actual expertise.
Right.
And they're knowledge poor, which basically means they hear so much about being sustainable, they hear so much about having the need to do something, but they don't actually have the in-house expertise. We're also seeing that increasingly there's 330 million small to mid-sized businesses in the world, which account for 40% of total emissions, total global emissions. But these are usually the companies that are overlooked. So the big companies that we all know of are in-house taking the actual steps because they have their internal sustainability teams, they have all the resources. But another thing that we have to think about, and I think we'll discuss this later on when we talk about the different scopes of emissions, all companies are so interlinked because of complex supply chains, long tails, etc., that it's very interdependent. And no one company will ever be able to reach net zero unless all its suppliers or all its buyers, etc., are also on the same journey. So again, at ExpectAI, we enable any company, but mainly small to mid-sized businesses to take this profitable climate action. And the way we do that is that we've built a decarbonization roadmap for all of them. We've given them the specific ROI meaning return on investment, actions that they can actually take. And another thing to think about is when we talk about sustainability, we talk about this shift towards decarbonization, electrification. Usually we think about just the big ticket items, right? Solar, wind, etc., nuclear. But with sustainability, you can start small, and I think that's when you start small, and if you multiply, something as simple as switching your lights off for a small company. If you multiply that, or if you reduce the waste actually by every single day of the year, by years and years on end, you can actually significantly reduce your impact without actually having to spend any money. So another aspect of profitable decarbonization is what are the things that you can do that are essentially free. So behavioral changes that you can do, that you can take, that will inherently improve your bottom line by either you using less energy or electricity, for example, which means less waste, which means less cost, etc. So one thing to think about for any business listening or even an individual is when you contextualize it to how do I reduce my costs, that's really when you can save on emissions, inherently be more sustainable, etc.
Interesting. So I think that's an area that we need to explore a little more, but maybe we'll do that after a short break. Thank you very much, Azeem. I'm enjoying this conversation and I hope the public is as well. And I have so many questions for you. But as an educator, something that I really, really struggle with is the understanding that education and awareness alone is not enough for action. What I've also understood over time is even motivation is not enough for action. What we really need for action is people who actually go and do something. In your case, it's even more difficult because you're asking businesses to come and invest in something that perhaps may not be their priority. So this whole conundrum of, yes, we've educated more people in the world, and without even education, people have the understanding and that things need to happen, that the climate is changing, that the emissions are increasing, everything we do. So practically every conversation that I go to or am a part of, we talk about individual steps that one can take. And yet there is very, very, very little action, not just in terms of individuals, but also in terms of big and small industries. So with this thing in mind, like how do you motivate businesses, small businesses to come and invest, and how does that kind of behavior change happen? And is there anything that you've learned that you can pass on to people like me who can also use it in their education related work?
Absolutely. So before getting into the actual business case for sustainability and climate action, I think a very important point that you brought up is there's usually three legs. There's climate education, there's climate activism, and then there's actual climate action.
Right.
I think most of the world and individuals have the first part, everyone knows about the climate, everyone knows it's important, so the education bit is there. But we see increasingly that most of the world is stuck on the activism part, you know, all the walks that we have, all the movements that we have, you know, on the streets across the world. Everyone is being a big activist for climate action. But at the same time, how do we then have a system change to actually take that action? Because at the end of the day, we can, you know, rally the masses and go on the street and complain about, you know, not taking action and, you know, be activists. But at the end of the day, what truly will count is the action that we take towards a more sustainable, greener, net zero future, etc. So that's one thing that we really see a lot of people struggling with, especially businesses. At ExpectAI, how we sort of try and put it is, if you go to a company and you say, hey, you should spend X amount on solar, for example, they're going to see it as a cost, and usually sustainability is synonymous with the cost. And that's a really big issue. But if I go to the same company and I say, hey, if you invest X amount, here's the ROI, the return on investment, and you know, you'll actually be saving money long term. I think the biggest thing to do is how do you show a company, and especially SMEs, the financial savings or the financial value of taking climate action, because that's really something that'll motivate them. If you go to a small corner shop and you say, hey, you will be able to save X amount of money a month or a year, that's really when their ears will perk up. But if you go to that same company and you say, hey, for the sake of the environment or climate, do this, I think it's the same message, but it's two very different ways of looking at it. And the former is actually what we need. Because, again, at the end of the day, everyone is in the same boat. Everyone needs to take this action, but only if it makes business sense will companies actually take that action. And that's really where, to get the whole world from activism to action, that's what we need. We need to show them the business case or the profitability of sustainability.
Right. And we were talking about starting small. We were talking about motivating people to do more. As an educator now, I see a lot of young people starting their small businesses or ideas in academia. And it would be nice for them to know what kind of trajectories they should take. So obviously, they should register it. They should look at the sustainability side of things, how the environment, economy, and society is being impacted by their work. But are there any suggestions that you have for them, because you have worked a little bit in this area? Are there any do's and don'ts that you would like to share with all the young people who are also now coming towards, you know, waste to business, sustainable business ideas?
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is to start off small. Usually we think about sustainability, about spending a big amount of capex on a very nice solar roof or a wind farm, which is, don't get me wrong, that's essential. But at the same time, for small businesses, the biggest thing is, what are the actions that you can take that either won't have a cost, that'll have a sort of quick saving, as we call it. There's an example of a company that I can share that we were working with in the UK. They were a massive construction company. And sure, they have to switch the material that they use and they have to do X, Y, Z. But one of the biggest actions for them was just replacing their tires on their trucks. And because of that, they actually were able to increase the efficiency of trucks by a few percent. And because they had thousands and thousands and thousands of trucks running daily for hours and hours, that magnitude that we see, that tangible output, was something that actually saved them quite a bit of money.
Right.
And so it's actions like that where usually people don't think about it, because who would think about sustainability and just switching out your truck tires? But at the same time, it's these small optimizations that if we do together, both from business collaboration, but then also individual collaboration, that's really where we get to see the magnitude of impact that we can actually have towards cutting emissions and actually reaching an eventual net zero for the world.
Right. And is there like any funny or interesting story, like anything that you came across, that any memory of your experiences so far that you'd like to share with people? And I'm putting you on the spot because I just thought it would be an interesting question.
So this was another sort of silly one. There was a chain of stores that we were looking at. And essentially what they started to do is they used to close at 5 p.m. So at 4 p.m. they would switch their heating off. They would say, for the last hour, we're not going to, touch our heating. But they had over 2,000 retail locations, and even that hour, so 1 hour of energy saved, multiplied by 2,000 locations, multiplied by 365 days of the year, something as silly as that, they saved another big chunk of not just cost but emissions as well, because of that. Another thing that we're seeing is increasingly companies are taking climate action because they have to, because they'll either be, they'll face a big tax or they have to disclose. But not a lot of companies are actually taking climate action because they can actually save money or make money off it. And that's one thing which the system change really needs. How do we actually enable and foster the growth? And of course, this has to do with education as well. You can't expect companies to do that without telling them or them knowing how to actually take that action.
Right, and something that I missed in the whole conversation, which I think is very, very important. One term that I read in the about your company, Una.
Yes.
Perhaps you want to talk about Una. And then also this whole infatuation with AI. So we are now seeing AI as the solution to almost everything. But actually it has more to do with us, right? How many problems we have created and how we will continue to create problems with or without AI. So after you talk about Una and what you guys do, can you also maybe highlight some of the goods and bads of using AI for sustainability, just for people to be also aware of that side, because I don't want them to go with the feeling that this has no challenges. So
absolutely. So Una is actually what our platform is called. So the company is called ExpectAI, but the real powerhouse of what we do is called Una. And Una is the climate action platform. And one thing that we've really embraced, because to actually tackle the climate issue, the climate crisis at scale, we need to use AI. We need to use proprietary tech, and we need to use all these different things that are coming up now. Because with millions and millions of companies around the world, there really needs to be that scalability of climate action, which we don't really see. So essentially what Una also does, and this is something that we've done for all 5.5 million companies in the UK, is we've created this thing called an adaptive carbon profile. We call it an ACP, which is essentially a sort of report card for a company, which tells them not only their emissions, not only their climate reduction roadmap and, all the actions that they can take, but more importantly, it gives them the ROI of those actions. It lays it out very nicely and says, here's all the actions that a company of your size in this industry, in this sector can take. And here's how much you'll have to spend. But more importantly, here's how much you'll be saving if you take this action. And this links into our conversation previously about making it a business case. Una has done this for all 5.5 million companies in the UK. And our goal is for Una to be available for every company in the world. And we were talking about this before, 330 million SMEs. That's really where we see the scalability of Una. Exactly. Just to touch upon your other question about AI, I think AI, if used correctly, will definitely speed up and lead to more innovative solutions, especially with tackling the climate crisis. But another thing that is usually overlooked is something that we call the digital emissions of AI. So again, AI is run on energy, and it's these massive data centers which do all these things, as we know. And usually most of those data centers are run on non-renewable sources, just because across the globe we don't have enough renewable energy infrastructure. So this is a big contention point where AI can really speed things up, both from a productivity point of view, both from a implementation and action point of view. But at the same time, it comes at its cost, which is usually overlooked, just because there's no physical emission that we see. Exactly. But with Una specifically, we use this thing called knowledge graph technology, and this sort of links into how every company is interconnected. Knowledge graphs essentially is a web of connections or nodes between different companies. And what we can decipher from that is which companies are linked to each other from a supplier point of view, which, and when we talk about the different scopes of emissions, that's really something which is increasingly more accessible through Una and the knowledge graph. And this is what we need to actually, again, scale the solution for companies across the world.
Fantastic. So interconnected is my favorite word as well, because I tell people the problems of the environment are interconnected, but the solution is also interconnected.
Absolutely.
And it's only when you explore those interconnections you can actually understand, the system better, and therefore make amendments in the system to tackle climate change.
100%.
So we're going for one more break, and then when we come back we'll have your final words.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Azeem. It's a conversation that we need to have and a conversation that we need to keep going, but also all segments have to come to an end and all conversations need to be cut down. There are maybe a couple of more questions that I would like you to talk about. One is, how do you place all of this in Pakistan? Where is Pakistan in all of this? Because you look at, I'm sure that there are international companies that come to you as well. Where is Pakistan placed in all of this, and where do you want to see Pakistan in the sustainability sphere in the coming years?
So Pakistan is a very interesting case whereby usually the common person on the street, the average person, the average Pakistani, will probably not care about climate action, sustainability, because again, they think that they're just another drop in the sea. And how would they actually contribute towards, actually reducing? The other thing about Pakistan is, for a country of 250 plus million people, we are inherently a more sustainable economy than others around the world, both from a consumption point of view, but then also from an emission point of view. And a simple example that I can give is, I think all of us growing up have been taught, light band kar do, save electricity, because we have grown up knowing that there's not enough to go around, not just in our country but in the world. So everything as simple as switching the lights off, or keeping the plastic bags stored under the sink, or even switching the water, switching the tap off. We already have these sustainability practices sort of inbuilt. But another thing is, how do we scale it from the individual to businesses, to companies, etc., etc., and how do we leverage it? The other unfortunate thing is, Pakistan is very climate prone. What that means is that we're very vulnerable, as we saw in the floods in 2022. Even though our overall impact is not very high based from an emission point of view, we are a very vulnerable country from the impacts of climate change. So the way we need to see it, and the way businesses, politicians, the general economy and individuals need to see it, is how do we work towards a net positive, a greater good that'll obviously not just benefit the world as a whole, but will save our country from facing other calamities in the future. We know that climate change is a massive issue, and that there's going to likely and unfortunately be more extreme weather events. There's going to be droughts, there's going to be floods, there's going to be a lot of loss of life. So how do we actually act towards that for the greater good for Pakistan? I think that's the biggest thing that we need to think about. We're not doing this for the world, we're doing it for our own livelihood. And another thing that we spoke about, and I really like that you brought it up, the word interconnectedness is so deeply rooted with sustainability and climate action and climate change. Because if we don't act and there's more natural disasters, that means we're going to lose crops. If we lose crops, the prices will go up. That'll lead to economic turmoil, etc., etc. So the thing about geography and climate change, climate action, all these things is, it's that the systems are so interlinked: the political system, the economic system, the social system. How do we decipher all the jargon that's out there, but then how do we actually work towards a greater good? And if you ask me for any advice that I can give to the people listening, it's one, start small and start today. Because climate action isn't about, I'm going to start in a month, or I'm going to start in a year. What can you do from right now, from today, to eventually reach that scalability of, eventually reaching net zero? Number one. Number two, contextualize climate change impacts and emissions to cost. So if you think about it from a cost point of view, if I reduce my cost, I'm saving money. Yes, that's fantastic, but then you're also saving your emissions, which is something that's usually overlooked, and it's a thing that most businesses, most individuals don't actually look at. So that's a different lens to look at it from. And number three, we're all in this together. So there has to be scalable collaboration between individuals, between businesses, both existing and upcoming businesses. And again, I said this in the start, there's never going to be just one winner in the fight against the climate crisis, but everyone will be a loser if we don't act.
Wonderful. So on that note, and some very important ones that you made, Azeem, let's end the conversation, and I will perhaps summarize the last message that you just gave, which was to contextualize, to act, and that we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.